Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first session of the virtual seminar series brought to you by Southern Maryland RC&D. I'm going to wait one more minute to allow those to join, but I please ask that you make sure you are muted and that your videos are off at the moment. Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jessica McLinsey, and I am with Southern Maryland RC&D, which is Resource Conservation and Development. Our office is located in Leonardtown, Maryland, but we are part of a national organization that has offices all around the country. We have historically worked on land conservation projects, so our local landowners, farmers, forest owners have been a part of conserving the green spaces that we have left. But one of the new initiatives that we've been working on is community outreach, and that's why you are all here today. We ran Eco School last summer that we hope to see again next summer, and our winter virtual seminar series is here to continue to connect people with the environment, even throughout the winter months when some people don't have a chance to get outdoors. So I'm glad that you're all here. Before I get started, I would just like to remind everyone of some Zoom etiquette. So please make sure you stay muted so that we can hear Molly's fabulous presentation. You are welcome to turn your cameras on if you wish to feel as though you're part of the presentation with Molly here. But please just remember, anything you say or do on Zoom, the virtual world can see you. So please make sure it's internet appropriate. If you have questions, please place those in the chat while Molly is speaking, and I will go through those at the end with Molly. And if you would like to unmute to ask questions at the end, we will have time for that as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Molly. Molly Moore is the president of the Southern Maryland Audubon and is a Charles County Master Gardener and Maryland Master Naturalist based at the Nanjemoy Creek Environmental Education Center in Charles County. She was a Washington Post reporter and foreign correspondent for nearly 30 years, based in India, Mexico, Istanbul, Jerusalem, and Paris. She spent a decade in a second career as a communications consultant to national and state conservation nonprofit organizations. She lives with her husband, also a former Washington Post correspondent, on the Comico River in southern Charles County. They have one son who is a sculptor creating Mardi Gras floats in New Orleans. And with that, I will turn it over to Molly. Thank you everyone for being here. Please remember to stay on mute and keep your videos off if you wish, and you may turn your videos on if you would like. There'll be time for questions at the end. So thank you, Molly. Take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'm so excited to be here with you for this presentation of native plants for birds, bees, and beauty. And just to follow up on Jessica's, hang on one second here. Introduction there. Yes, I was a reporter at the Washington Post for just about 30 years and was assigned around the world and covered a lot of wars and other unpleasantness and wrote a book about one of them, and then decided I needed a change of pace. So retired during COVID and became a master gardener through the University of Maryland, which led me to become a master naturalist. I've worked with Audubon for several years and have been president for the last 2.5 years. And I'm also a beekeeper. So Southern Maryland Audubon covers Southern Maryland, the Charles, St. Mary's, Calvert counties. We do bird walks, we do nature talks, we do nature journaling. We have scholarships for both students and adults and teachers to Audubon's amazing nature camp in Hog Island in Maine. We go to festivals, to local festivals to share knowledge of birds and wildlife. We get involved in advocacy to advocate for legislation that supports conservation efforts. We also have a program for barn owls, barn owl nesting boxes. Barn owls are an endangered species in Maryland, not around all the country, but they are here in Maryland. So we do a huge variety of things, and we always welcome new volunteers. And you don't have to be an expert to come to any of our bird walks or activities. We do things for every level. One of our big projects right now is the Lexington Manor Passive Park Community Garden. We are creating the gateway native garden to this community garden. The community garden just opened this year. There's raised beds available to rent, and there are scholarships available for those who can't afford to pay. There's also half the garden that's just open to the public, and anyone who volunteers to come and weed and pick veggies can take home produce on the days that they're volunteering. Our extra veggies go to a local community food bank. So there was this space in front of the garden, and we started thinking what it really needs is a native garden. And so we teamed up with these amazing students, the Natural Resources Management Program at the Forest Career and Technology Center in Leonardtown. And they are helping to build this garden. And some of the things you see here, I'm going to talk about further in the presentation that you can do on a smaller level in your own yard. But the first thing, the students came and laid down cardboard to suppress the horrendous weeds that we had growing outside the fence line there. They dug out big chunks of rocks. For those who may not be familiar with the history of Lexington Park, this area where the passive park is, this 84 acres, used to be Navy base housing for people who worked at the base. And when they were torn down about 15 years ago, there was just lots of stuff left in the ground. And, we've pulled bicycle tires and pavement and all sorts of stuff out of the ground. The students just moved mountains of mulch and compost that were donated by St. Mary's County Recreation and Parks. And just a couple of weeks ago, they planted out the first garden. They planted more than 300 plugs and plants. So what are native plants anyway? We're sitting here talking about these native plants. They are indigenous terrestrial and aquatic species that have evolved and occur naturally in a particular region or ecosystem and habitat. And that is for millennia, hundreds of thousands of years, not just plants that have been introduced in the last 100 years. So why do we recommend even that you grow natives? So they're better suited to our climate. Once they're established, they require much less water to maintain. They don't need fertilizer, and they'll grow in all the different types of soils that we have here in Southern Maryland. There's natives for any kind of light condition, whether you have a sunny yard or patio or a shady one or one that's part sun and part shade. And we're going to talk about the different plants you can use in those areas. They add year-round beauty and interest to your garden. They're not like the annuals that just bloom for one season and then that's it. They are there all year round. They're healthier for you and the environment for all of these reasons too. And they provide essential food and shelter for local birds, pollinators, beneficial insects, and other wildlife. This picture here is of a sweet little catbird, and it's getting ready to devour some of these American beautyberries on this native American beautyberry plant. So stepping back to the veggie garden for a minute, why would we want native plants there? Well, they bring more pollinators into the veggie garden area to give you better quality vegetables. And the natives also help alleviate drainage problems for this garden, and they can do the same thing in your yard. We had volunteers from Historic Solderly with a little bobcat dug this trench for the bricks that were going to line the border. We were all ready for the students to come out. We arrived in the morning and we suddenly had a water feature because water had drained into the trench from the garden. So in the future, there will be, a wide 12-foot strip of plants there that can help absorb that water instead of it just draining off down to the ditch that's near the road there. By the way, this plant you see here is okra, and they have those beautiful flowers on them. So let's step back and look at the big picture. More than half of US birds are in decline and could lose their habitats by 2080. We know this through extensive research by Audubon, Cornell Institute of Ornithology, and hundreds of conservation groups that have fed data into what's going on with our bird life in the US. So this would include the Baltimore Oriole may no longer breed in Maryland. This wood thrush, which is the state bird of DC, may no longer live in DC. And this amazing scarlet tanager, which requires extensive forest land for its territory to breed and raise young, is diminishing rapidly as well. And it's not only the birds. I'm sure some of you have heard about the insect crisis. More than 40% of insect species are now threatened with extinction. So here's the problem, and this should look familiar to any of you who live in Southern Maryland. This is going on all over Southern Maryland. 43% of the US is now developed as suburban or urban areas. And the problem with that, or one of the big problems with that, is generally the plants in suburban and urban areas tend to be about 80% non-native. So as you drive along the roads in Southern Maryland, 301 or any of the other roads, you see these big developments going up, and you see that they have mowed down forest and fields to build those developments. And you see very few trees, and the few trees you see that are planted, way too many of them are non-natives. So here's an example of some of the yards you see that we've developed this idea that you need these big, expansive green lawns, and you need clipped hedges, and you've got to mulch everything and, not have a plant out of place. And, that's the perfect yard. Well, it's not a perfect yard for birds or pollinators or insects. I mean, there is just no room and board for birds in the yards you see here. And hopefully one of these is not one of your yards. So what do all these babies need to grow up? It's insects. Even birds where the adults eat seeds, you see them at your feeder, they've got to feed insects to their babies. So there was really interesting research done by an expert named Douglas Ptolemy at the University of Maryland. He's like the god to the native plant world. And he had his graduate students do a research project. It was actually done in suburban Maryland. And they put cameras on a chickadee nest. This is a Carolina chickadee, which is the species of chickadee we have here in our region. And they wanted to see how many insects and caterpillars does it take for this Carolina chickadee to raise one family. And they discovered the answer was between 7,500 to 9,000 insects and caterpillars. One family, one clutch. So you can see if you don't have native plants in your yard, it's going to be really hard for little birds like this chickadee to survive in your yard. So here's just one example of the difference. The best possible tree to plant if you had room in your yard and we're looking for a tree to plant would be an oak. Our native oaks support 537 different species of caterpillars. That's why you always see lots of birds up in oak trees, because there's lots of insects there for them to chow down on. So the ginkgo tree, which we all have heard, oh my God, it's one of the oldest trees on the planet. Well, it is, but it was not native to our part of the planet. And here in Southern Maryland, it only supports 4 species of caterpillars. So what can you do? This problem seems enormous, right? So as it turns out, you can turn your yard into a safe refuge for birds and pollinators. It's easier than you think, and it will help the wildlife, the birds, the pollinators a lot more than you might think. But if you have not grown natives before, or even if you have, you kind of want to think, where do I even start? So one of the first things you want to look at is pick the spot where you want to plant some natives. And you need to think about, is my garden in the sun? Is it in the shade, or does it have partial sun and partial shade? Look at the angle of the sun. Will the house or a wall or a fence or a row of trees affect the sun in your yard? Will it block it out for half the day or all the day or part of the day? And then consider whether the side is wet or dry, or like, many of our yards and gardens, probably a combination. And then what type of soil do I have? Clay, sandy, loamy. Now, the wonderful thing about native plants is it really doesn't matter what kind of soil you have. Most of our natives can grow in just about any type of our soil that we have. And then how much space do you have that you want to plant out? And one of the things we recommend is don't start huge, keep it manageable. Start small, and you can always grow it. You could take one little place like this was around a bird bath, and just it was a small area, and I wanted to attract more birds there and have some native plants, and just planted a few native plants around this one area, and it just completely changed the nature of that corner of the yard. Or you might just take one bed, and you might want to concentrate on specific types of natives. These are cardinal flowers, and they are a little more persnickety than a lot of natives, because in the wild, they grow in moist edges of woodlands. So you do need to kind of replicate that in your own yard if you're growing the cardinal flowers. They like a moist, rich soil. But the great things about natives is they can fit any space. And here's some examples. Some of you may have been to the Leonardtown Library, where they've created this amazing front yard garden, just full of native plants. And this garden has only been there about 3 years, and already, anytime you go over there, you see all kinds of birds flitting around in the bushes. You see a huge variety of butterflies and insects, moths, native bees, little sweat bees, native pollinator wasps. It's just wonderful to walk through that area and see all the life that's going on in those native beds. But you don't have to have a big space like that. Say you live in an apartment block. You might approach the manager of the building or the owner, and if there's like a little hell strip, or some little area that has nothing going on and nothing growing, ask him if you could take that little area and grow native plants there. Or if you don't have a yard or garden at all, you can grow natives in pots that you put in your window or on your doorstep or on a little balcony. Here is a great example. This is a little backyard garden in Baltimore, where, as you can see, there's no exposed ground space. And so the gardener has planted everything in containers, and there's plenty of natives that are just very happy in containers. Or if you have a larger area, you can tackle it in stages. Like in this case, the plants down at the bottom of the screen, the blue are blue mist flowers, and the yellow are black-eyed Susans, Rudbeckia hirtug, which are our native Maryland flower. And in the back are some common zinnias and marigolds to fill in while we're waiting for the natives to fill in the spaces. So maybe it's, some natives can be expensive if you're buying them all. And you may want to fill in with just some other plants while you're waiting for those natives to spread out on their own. There's absolutely no harm in that, because the pollinators, and I raise honeybees, and they love the zinnias. The other thing you've probably heard a lot of us in the native plant world harp about is reducing your lawn. And again, you don't have to switch over your whole lawn all at once. You can reduce it a little bit by a little bit, like in this yard here. They took a patch just near the in the front yard, which is a small front yard, and planted black-eyed Susans. So you want to try to mimic natural habitats with native flowers, which means you would have flowers. You also want bushes and you want trees. And that complexity attracts different variety of birds and pollinators and other wildlife, because I'm sure you may have noticed in your own yard that different birds hang out at different levels in the trees and the shrubs and the flower beds that you have. So the first thing you want to do after figuring out what part of your yard you want to turn into a native garden is to make a plan. And it does not have to be fancy like this, which is not terribly fancy. I mean, you can draw it on the back of a napkin or a back of an envelope, but you kind of want to map out the area that you're going to be working in and look at what's close to it. Is it close to your deck? Is it under a big tree? Do you want to connect it with a walkway? And you tend to want to work in from the edges if you're doing a larger area. And just think about all these site conditions. And as we mentioned before, one of the biggest site conditions to think about is the angle of the sun. And so right now is a fabulous time to prep a garden bed for next spring to plant. And this will also give you some time to see where the sun is. And of course, the sun is different in the summer than it is in the winter. So it will give you a chance. One of the things that's really helpful to do is just go out with your smartphone and take pictures at different times of day and different times of the year, and then go back and look at them. And it'll be a great record of where the sun and the shade is in your yard or the area that you want to plant. So this was our plan for the first part of the native plant garden in Lexington Park. So this is a relatively large area. This is 50 feet long by 12 feet wide. So we had a lot of space to cover. But again, you don't have to do this all at once. You could just take one little corner of this and have a really nice garden. The spotted bee balm is this great little purple plant that's grows to be about 1.5 feet tall. And then behind it is the foxglove beer tongue, which is a little bit taller. And behind that is the common milkweed, which can get really tall. So how do you want to prepare your bed? So remember, we watched the students laying down all that cardboard. This is a small native plant garden that we were going to expand at the Nanjemoy Creek Environmental Education Center. And this is a property owned by the leased by the Charles County School Board, where every fifth grader in Charles County goes and spends a day at this amazing place that has marshes and forest and learns about nature and wildlife. And they had a small native garden there and wanted to expand it. So the first thing you have to do is get rid of the weeds that are there. And one thing that has really changed in gardening in the last few years, and the University of Maryland has been a national leader in this, is we no longer tell people to till the soil, or when they dig out the grass here or the weeds. One of the things that the University of Maryland researchers discovered is that it destroys the microbes in the soil when you churn it up and dig into it. And the University of Maryland also recommends that large-scale farmers go to no-till farming, and you'll see a lot of that around Maryland now because of their influence. And also, the other thing that tilling and digging in your soil does is it brings up the seed banks from years ago. So any weeds that were growing under these weeds you see here, if you clear out this grass and you churn up that soil, they're going to pop right up into your garden. So this is where the cardboard comes in. It's a really easy way to suppress the weeds. The weeds under that will die. One caution on the cardboard, you want to be sure that you don't use any cardboard that has this sort of, laminated or colored sides to it, because those may have chemicals in them or paints or dyes that can leach into the soil. And you want to take out any staples, and you want to rip off any masking tape or tape that was used. But this is just cardboard collected from, Amazon and other deliveries over the course of a year. It's a good idea to kind of water the cardboard, and that just kind of presses it down a little bit more into the weeds and makes it a little bit easier to handle. And then after you do that, just pile on the organic matter. And it's impossible to have too much. And you can use anything. Right now is a great time of year because you can put leaves in it. You can put if you have some old pots laying around with potting soil, you can dump that potting soil in it. You can, of course, use good quality topsoil or compost that you either buy or get from a reputable place, because you want to put, if you could, ideally at least about 12 inches worth, because it's going to compact down. By next spring, a 12-inch pile will be maybe about 4 inches deep. So it's almost impossible to put too much. You can just put kind of everything that you can find there. So then the next big question becomes, how will I know what will grow in my garden? And this website is the absolute best cheat sheet you can find anywhere. The Alliance for the Bay has digitized the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service native plant guide to Southern Maryland, which has every native plant that grows in our region. And the actual book is tiny little a print that's hard to see, but the Alliance for the Bay recently put all this online. And this is where it is, at allianceforthebay.org/native plant center. So you go to the Native Plant Center here, and you can click and fill in all the variables for your yard. So we in Southern Maryland are in what's considered the coastal plain. The mountain region is out west, and the Piedmont is kind of that area up north of us, Montgomery, Howard, up toward Baltimore. You can plug in which kind of plant you're interested in. You can see they have ferns, grass, herbaceous are your basic native plants with flowers, little shrubs, big shrubs, trees, vines. Just kind of plug in whatever it is that you're interested in. You can plug in the kind of sun exposure you have. The soil texture. I tended to leave this one open here because most of the natives, with a few exceptions, will kind of grow in almost any of the soils we have. And then, is your soil dry, or is it moist? Is it wet? Does it stay flooded all the time? And then you click, and you're going to get a list of all the plants that meet the criteria that you put in that you can choose from. And just to give you an idea of the information that they're going to give you, this is for an amazing little unknown plant called the white snake root. It's one of the few plants that really is deer resistant, because it will give them a very bad stomachache if they eat them. You don't really have to worry about pets around it, because if a pet got hold of the roots and chewed on the roots, that might give it an upset stomach. But other than that, if it's just sniffing around the leaves or something, it's not going to be a problem. But you can see this plant grows in all 3 of the regions of Maryland. It tells you that it gets to be 1 to 5 feet high. It tells you what kind of fruit it has, the sun exposure, the type of soil. So the wonderful thing about this snake root is it will grow in the deepest shade you have, and it has beautiful white flowers on it that bloom throughout the summertime and attract all sorts of pollinators. It's really, really a nice native plant. So here's a few more easy to grow natives. They're like my favorite go-to list, because They'll grow just about anywhere. They'll grow in bright sun or partial sun. These will grow kind of anywhere except in deep, deep shade. The spotted bee balm, which you see that has that bee on it, is this just funky looking plant. The petals of it are just so cool, and they kind of keep getting longer as the summer wears on. The blue mist flower is a beautiful plant. The common sneezeweed, it will not make you sneeze. The way it got its name were the Native Americans used it, and they would dry out the seed heads and use them for snuff. So yes, that would make them sneeze, but these are not going to make you don't have to worry about any allergies with the sneezeweed. The goldenrod is one of the best pollinator magnets you could possibly plant. It attracts some 500 different kinds of insects and pollinators it supports. And here again, the goldenrod gets a really bad rap for giving you allergies, which is completely untrue because it's not pollinated by the wind. But in the wild, usually goldenrod grows next to ragweed, and it's the ragweed that will make you sneeze. So it's perfectly fine to have goldenrod in your yard. These four plants, the spotted bee balm, the blue mist, the sneezeweed, and the goldenrod, are doubly great because the deer will leave them alone, the bunnies will leave them alone. They're just not tasty to the critters. So if you have a lot of deer pressure where you're trying to grow things, or you have lots of bunnies, these plants are real survivors. Butterfly weed is it's a type of milkweed. It is fabulous for pollinators, and as is the Joe Pye. So it's hit or miss on the deer and the bunnies. The bunnies might like to nibble on the butterfly weed when the first little shoots come out in the spring. So you would probably want to protect it if you have rabbits in your yard. And the deer will occasionally munch my Joe Pye. But one of the interesting things the deer taught me, some people don't like to plant Joe Pye because it gets so tall. It can grow to be 4 or 5 or even 6 feet tall if it loves your conditions. So one year the deer came by and mowed down all of my Joe Pye halfway. And that year, they only grew to about 3 feet tall, and they had twice as many blooms as they normally have, and they bloomed for a longer period. So what the deer were doing, what is known as gardening, is the Chelsea chop, which a lot of people who have smaller yards use. It's gotten its name because roughly around the time of the Chelsea flower show in late May, or here with climate change, more likely in June, if you have tall growing natives that you don't want to get too tall, you can come along and clip about the top third of them off. And you'll have a smaller, more compact plant, excuse me, with more blooms on it. Another thing you want to think about is the height and the placement of your native plants. So here are the blue mist flowers that we've been talking about before, and they grow about 1.5 feet. And then these are orange cone flowers, which are related to the black-eyed Susans and grow a little larger. They can grow to 2.5 feet. So the blue mist was planted in front of them, and then the Joe Pye was planted behind the orange cone flowers. So here you have them all growing in harmony together. And one of the things in planting natives, it's always better to plant in groups of at least 3. And that's for a couple of reasons. It helps the pollinators, for one, to have a patch of one kind of flower instead of having one plant here and then a different kind next to it and a different kind next to that. Some pollinators can only are only supported by certain types of flowers or flower petals, and because of the length of their tongue or the size of their mouth. So they don't want to be hop skipping around all over your garden to different plants. And if you have several of one variety all clumped together, that really helps the pollinators eat and pollinate more efficiently. The other thing is that you plant in layers to support different kinds of birds and pollinators. So here's a sweet bay magnolia, which is a great native magnolia. It doesn't have, its leaves aren't as big as the southern ornamental magnolia, and it doesn't stay green all year round, although with our warmer climate now, many of its leaves cling to it all throughout the year, but it has smaller flowers that are just super sweet smelling. And then it has red berries in the fall, and the mockingbirds and the red-eyed vireos and other birds just love those seeds. So beneath the sweet bay magnolia is an inkberry, and that is one of our native hollies. It's called an inkberry because the berries are dark purple and very lustrous, and birds and wildlife love to eat them. Over here is the wild bergamot, and you can see it's already bloomed, and its seed heads are it's already gone to seed here, and it's a relatively tall native plant. And then also included in this group is New York ironweed, which is a little shorter than the wild bergamot. And then the cardinal flower um, is planted in front. So you can see there's something at several different levels here for different kind of birds, like the sparrows and the wrens and the cardinals will flit around in that foreground area where the plants are flowering and where the seed heads are. And then you'll have different types of birds up in the magnolia and in the bushes, the inkberry bush. So one thing when you're planting out your natives, if you're growing them yourself from seed, or if you're winter sowing, which is growing in milk jugs, which we'll be having some workshops this winter in Lexington Park and Leonardtown libraries to show you how to do that. It's sometimes better to plant those tiny little seedlings in a pot and let them grow for 2 or 3 months. This will make them a little more survivable against the bunnies and the gophers and the deer that like those fresh, young, tender shoots that come out. So you want to plant your seedlings about a foot apart because they're going to fill in. And some people plant them further apart because the plants are going to be more than a foot in diameter. But planting them this close together will help you suppress weeds because it will shade out any weeds that try to come up around them. And it's just going to make your maintenance a lot easier. So one of the things they say about natives is that natives sleep, they creep, and they leap. The first year you plant them and you think they're sleeping, all you see are these little small bunches of leaves that have poked out of the ground there. And in the second season, you'll get flowers and they'll grow up and they'll start filling in, but you can see there's still a few little bare spots there. The third year, they're going to take over and just bloom profusely. And starting in the fourth year, then you can start dividing them and giving plants to your friends, or it's a very cheap way for you to expand your own garden. So the reason I said that they only act like they're sleeping is the native plant's real secret to success is their amazing roots. So in that first year, they are putting down roots. You can see this plant here. Look how long the root is on that tiny little seedling. You think that's a tiny little plant sticking its head out of the soil, but all kind of growth is going on down there underneath. Here's another example of a garden. This was planted in the late summer of 2021. And then this was the next year. This one just really took off, but you can see there was an area that wasn't fully planted in natives, and there's some zinnias back there toward the top. But then here's the third year, and all the natives that were kind of sleeping and taking their time have just really blossomed into a magnificent small garden. Here's the Nanjamoy one, the one that I showed you a little while ago that we built last year, and we planted the plants in the fall. And this spring, this is the common sneezeweed. It just took off like wildfire. And what was great about it, the reason that area is bare there in the front where we wanted to expand the garden is the bunnies and the gophers had a field day with the plants that had been planted there previously. So we were really looking for plants that would stand up to them. And the sneezeweed really did its job and is just a beautiful summer bloomer. So you want to go beyond and not think just about flowers. You want to think about the native trees, and we have some really great ones. The eastern red cedar, which you see out in a lot of fields here, is a fabulous tree. And in fact, in the winter, you will see these are cedar waxwings, these birds are called, and they just come in and gobble the seeds on the red cedar tree. The sweet bay magnolia that I mentioned is just one of my absolute favorites because its little flowers are so sweet in the spring, and then it gets these beautiful red seed heads on it in the fall. They've just passed this little guy. He's a red-eyed vireo, and his family comes and it can strip that sweet bay magnolia of seeds in the course of maybe 2 weeks. But it's just so much fun to see them in there chowing down on these seeds. The eastern redbud that you see around in the spring is a beautiful native for our region. And that's a rose-breasted growbeak you see sitting in that redbud tree there. The oak trees I already mentioned is like the #1 tree. If you have space to plant it, you'll get more birds and more insects than any other tree you can plant. This northern mockingbird here is sitting in a fringe tree, which is another beautiful tree. It's a small tree. It doesn't get more than about 12 or 15 feet tall. And in the spring, it's just completely covered with these silky white flowers, very fragile looking. And then in the fall, it gets these purple berries, which are actually called drupes. And this mockingbird and his family, while the vireos are chowing on my sweet bay magnolia, the mockingbirds are chowing on the fringe tree. And these are the birds, they're chowing down so much now because they're bulking up for the winter, because they know that pickings are going to be slim pretty soon. And then here is our Native American holly, which if there weren't so much development going on, you would see more of them, but you see a lot of them sometimes along the highways in the wooded areas in southern Maryland that haven't been developed yet. And you don't want to forget shrubs. Shrubs are great. The common witch hazel, which blooms in the dead of winter, is a great shrub. The spice bush, which supports specialty butterflies, has beautiful flowers, berries, and it's a nice color in the fall. Here's the flowers that I mentioned to you down below on the fringe tree in the springtime flowers. And then right now it's a beautiful yellow color. And red chokeberries are another great small shrub that you can plant in your garden that have nice white flowers in the spring, beautiful red berries in the early fall, and then this amazing red leaves in the fall as well. So everybody likes hummingbirds, and there are plants that you can plant to keep them happy in their yard for 3 seasons. The first hummingbird plant that I love is the wild columbine, and it blooms early in the spring, like in April and May, and that's when the migrant hummingbirds are coming through. They've flown all the way across the Gulf of Mexico from Central America. They're exhausted, they're hungry, they're looking for nectar. And also so you'll get the migrants passing through that can feed off of the columbine. You also get our residents that are starting to arrive, that they're also tired and hungry. And you notice when you see hummingbirds in your yard or at your feeders or hopefully at your flowers in the early spring, a lot of times they look really thin and scrawny. And that's because they've been flying over 1,000 miles. So then in early summer, you have the scarlet bee balm, and it's a real hummingbird magnet too. And then a little bit later in the summer, the cardinal flower blooms. And the cardinal flower It's just one of the most satisfying flowers you can plant if you have the right conditions of shade and moist soil. Hummingbirds love it, butterflies love it. It's just a constant hive of activity of bird and insect life while they're blooming, and they can bloom into the fall. The other fabulous plant you can plant is the coral honeysuckle, which is our native honeysuckle. The honeysuckle you see growing around a lot that smells sweet and has the cream and yellow colored flowers is the Japanese honeysuckle, which is invasive to our area, and it has almost no nutrition for birds and insects. But the wonderful thing about the coral honeysuckle is it will bloom all summer and deep into the winter until we get our first freeze. So when you're planting, you also want to think about making your yard a year-round B&B for birds and pollinators. So clustered mountain mint is a great native plant, and it is nothing like the invasive mint that will completely take over your garden, the kind that you see at the big box stores. This is a much better behaved mint. It smells, the leaves smell very minty. You can use them in tea and cooking. And when they bloom in the early summer, they are just absolutely covered in butterflies and pollinators. But you want to leave the seed heads on them because you'll see in the picture below the flowers there. The seed heads provide food for birds all winter long. You'll see them clustering around the seed heads eating them. The goldenrod is another great two-season plant for birds. You have and insects. You have the beautiful flowers in the fall, and there are more than a dozen different kinds of goldenrods that you can grow here, and they start blooming at different times. So if you have several different kinds, you could have blooms over the course of a couple of months in the summer and into the fall. And you want to leave the seed heads standing again, because that will provide great food for birds in the winter. And plus, the native bees will lay their eggs down in the stems in the wintertime. And switchgrass, which is a native grass, is another one that has, in the summertime, it's beautiful and green and has these beautiful plumes, and birds love to get down and scratch around in the grasses. And the same thing if you leave them in the winter, it provides great shelter for birds. Plus, again, the seeds will provide them with food. So that brings us to where we all are now. And how do you prep your garden for the fall? And the first thing we urge is leaving the leaves. Don't bag the leaves. Definitely don't blow the leaves. Don't cut the dead flower stalks or grasses. And this is why the leaves and the stems are really winter's best blanket. It provides shelter for beneficial insects. It provides food and shelter for birds and small mammals and turtles and frogs. Because just take a look at what's living under your leaves. The bees are living in the stalks of the plants. The butterflies are laying eggs in the leaves. If you want lightning bugs in your yard, you have to leave the leaves because they require the leaf duff to lay their eggs and for the little glowworms to hatch and grow up into fireflies. And the Luna moth will come out from under the leaves. So all of these things are living in your yard and really require the leaves. So this is why we say, please don't blow their cover. And then, so winter arrives. Who knows when it's going to arrive this year? Maybe it won't arrive at the rate it's going. But here you go. You have the sweet bay magnolia now that we saw earlier, and now becomes a resting spot for birds in the wintertime. The inkberry, what berries don't get eaten in the fall will still be there in the winter for birds to eat, and it's an evergreen, so it provides great hiding places for birds all through the winter. And the zinnia seeds are the same, food for the birds and stems for nesting insects. Also, you see here the seed heads and stems of the native mountain mint, the anise hyssop. and sage, and the switchgrass with the seed heads for food and the stalks for insects and the clumps for bird shelter. So you're going to have a whole little wildlife ecosystem here in this uh, pretty small garden right here. There's an amazing amount of wildlife in the winter. And in the foreground, you see a river birch tree, which is also native and is a great tree for us here in Southern Maryland. So you're attracting all this wildlife and birds and pollinators and insects to your yard. We'd be pretty remiss if we didn't note that you shouldn't be using pesticides and non-organic fertilizers. One of the greatest enemies to pollinators and beneficial insects are all these mosquito spraying companies, which if they're killing mosquitoes, which actually some of them don't do very efficiently, they're also killing the other insects in your yard. And why I say they don't kill the mosquitoes very efficiently, we have different types of mosquitoes here. And to really kill them, you'd have to know the best times of day and which types of mosquitoes in the area you're spraying. And Mosquito Joe just doesn't go quite that in depth with their spray. And the other thing is to please keep your kitties indoors. It's safer for the birds and the butterflies and for your pet. Cats kill an estimated 1 billion birds every year. I mean, it's in their nature. You can't stop them from doing it. But it's much, especially these days, it's so much healthier to keep your cats indoors because there's diseases they can get from other wildlife like foxes. There's now coyotes in every single county in Maryland. So better for the birds, the butterflies, and your kitty here to keep them indoors. So thank you guys so much for listening to all this. I know maybe I fed you with a fire hose, but I'm more than happy to take any of your questions.
Molly, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
We do have a question in the chat from Nancy. She's wondering, what are some of the native plants that do well in containers?
Oh, so almost any of the smaller growing native plants. You would probably not want to plant a Joe Pye in a container unless you had a really big one. But the black-eyed Susans and the yellow cone flowers do fabulously in planters. You could mix them with some of the blue mist flower. Any types of the asters grow really well in containers. So any of the flowers that are on the smaller to medium size would be great in containers. The one thing about containers, so one of the things that's wonderful about like this garden you're looking at here, it's completely survived the drought this summer with no water. All these plants are really drought resistant, but containers do dry out faster than the soil that you would plant them in. So they may require a little more maintenance, especially in the real heat of the summer. You don't have to drown them with water like you do a lot of annuals, but you do need to make sure that your containers don't completely dry out the plant. And just a note on that, clay pots are really pretty, but they totally suck the moisture out of the soil. So if you have clay pots, it's a lot better to plant your plants in some type of plastic container and then set that inside the clay pot.
Great information. Thank you for sharing that. We have a few more questions. Laura would like to know, how much room do you give for trees like redbuds?
So one of the things of the Alliance for the Chesapeake website will tell you what for each type of tree the amount of space. But so for a redbud, they tend to grow maybe 15 to 20 feet tall. If they're really old, they may get up to 25 feet. So they're a relatively small, compact tree. And all trees you want to plant a decent distance from your house. You just don't want to plant trees right up close to your house because the branches will bang against your house. They'll also allow things like ants and maybe little mice to find little easier ways to get into your house. So for a red bud, you would probably want to have a diameter area of maybe about 20 feet or so for the tree to grow. Now you can also plant other natives, ground covers and things that don't mind the shade underneath the redbud tree as well. But they're one of our best trees. They're one of our best small trees. Highly recommend them.
Great, thank you. And Emily has a question. She's wondering, can these plants be purchased locally?
They can. There are several really good places. Chesapeake Natives in Prince George's County grows only natives. It's a nonprofit, and they have plant sales throughout the summer and fall. And if you volunteer there, you can learn a lot about native plants, and they're always eager for volunteers. There's a great place in California near Leonardtown called Butterfly Alley, and they take orders online. And unlike some of the other places, they sell what are called plugs, which are like small the seedlings in small containers as opposed to pots. So they're much more economical to buy. They're not nearly expensive, because like a pot of a native plant can, depending on where you buy it, cost you $6, $7, $8, $9. And plugs are around under $3 each. And the truth of the matter is they're going to grow just as fast as that native you bought in a bigger pot. And so for Butterfly Alley, you can go online to their website and they'll tell you when they open their online ordering, and then they're open several weeks in the spring and the fall for you to go pick up your plants. But they have a list and you can check them out against the Alliance for the Bay list and see which ones you want. Also, the master gardeners in all the counties in Charles, Calvert, um, St. Mary's, Prince George's, Montgomery, all have native plant sales in the spring. We at Audubon do a native plant sale in June at our annual meeting and picnic. So one of the things is to Google your area, native plants in your area, to find out when these different organizations might be holding sales to sell them. Increasingly, the nurseries and the big box stores are selling some natives. They tend to sell the more common ones, which is perfectly fine. The other thing that you want to watch out for, though, is nurseries, being nurseries, have decided that they can improve on natives. So they have started growing nativars, which are cultivars of our natives. So maybe they want the flowers to be more yellow, or the flowers to be, the bushes to be shorter or taller. And so they will propagate these cultivars. The problem with that, that's not the flowers that our bees and butterflies have grown up with. And so some of the bees may no longer be able, to get the pollen out of them or the nectar. So we tend to recommend that you stay away from those and get what are called these straight species. And the way to tell the difference, if you look at a pot and it has, for instance, I'm just making this one up, but say um, Black-Eyed Susan Golden Burst. It has a cutesy little name like that, or Red Burst such a bee balm or something like that. That's usually your tip off that they're a cultivar and not a straight native.
Great, thank you. There are a few more questions at the chat that I'm going to read, but I also wanted to point out to everyone that I put the website for Southern Maryland RC&D's Facebook page into the chat. And I just wanted to remind you to take a moment and like and follow our Facebook page. That way you will get reminders when we set up events like this and you won't miss any of our other programming to come. So Alice had a question. What do you do if there is an outdoor cat on your property that isn't yours?
Well, if you can find the owner, that is the best thing to do, to try to tell them, that it's roaming around. And, look, people love their pets. I mean, I've throughout my life have had cats and I love them. So, you don't want to tell them that their cat is evil. But you might want to suggest to them that it would be healthier for the cat if they kept the cat indoors. Now, if it's a feral cat, that really doesn't belong to anybody, there may be somebody in the neighbor feeding it. You could call an animal shelter to come trap it and pick it up. But it's really all about educating your neighbors about your pets and the trouble they can get into, And, yes, you can mention that, they're going after the butterflies and birds in your yard. But if you have neighbors that are feeding feral cats, which are kind of homeless cats, um, it would be great to kind of politely tell them that that's not good for the cats and not good for the neighborhood. And you can call animal shelter to come and trap them, and they will attempt to find homes for them with their other rescued animals.
Okay, great. And Fawn has a very specific question. Molly, are you able to open the chat and see her question? I don't want to mispronounce the name of the species that she's asking particularly about.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me go there. Is this about the Rufous hummingbird?
Yes.
It's from Fawn. So I had a female Rufous hummingbird that stayed for 10 days. I lived in Westmoreland County across from Southern Maryland. Have you had any Rufous hummingbirds lately? So no, what we mostly have here are the ruby-throated hummingbirds, but the Rufous hummingbirds have been spotted. They're kind of considered a vagrant here, but people have spotted them across Southern Maryland, usually in the migration season, but occasionally people have reported some that are, just decide to found a good garden and decided to move in. So yeah, it's entirely possible that you may have had one.
And what about native flowering plants that would be good for the late migrating hummingbirds?
So the coral honeysuckle is still blooming like crazy right now. It would be a great one. You can plant it on a fence, or if you don't have a fence, it's something that you could plant in a pot and maybe have some sort of a structure, a little pyramid or a little wire fence or something that it can grow on. And it's one of the best things you can plant for this time of year. The cardinal flowers have pretty much stopped blooming, but they do bloom late into the fall. But for right now, the main thing blooming for them would be the coral honeysuckles.
Great. Thank you for all that wonderful information, Molly. I would like to offer if anyone would like to unmute or like to turn on their video, if you'd like to ask questions not in chat, you're welcome to do so at this time.
Hi, everyone. This is Robin Maydell, and I am an admin on a Facebook group called the Southern Maryland Native Plant People, which some of you may be aware of. And we are strictly educational, and we're solely focused on native plants in the Southern Maryland coastal plain, as well as invasives. And it's a no drama group. We don't let any off topic stuff come in, no politics, anything like that. And it's a good place for finding out about plant sales, plant shares, local nurseries, any new nurseries that have opened. There are a couple of smaller ones that have opened in the Southern Maryland area. Um, anyway, I would encourage you to join, and then you can keep up with the latest information. The other group to consider is Wild Ones, that does a lot with the connections between birds and insects and native plants. And the Chesapeake Bay chapter is very active in the area. And in fact, I know that a woman who goes by the name Nick Haven, her name is Marlene, does a lot of seed sowing, winter seed sowing, and seed saving workshops. So if you're interested in any of that, check out Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay chapter, and they're on Facebook also.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who can stand to be on Facebook these days, you can get a lot of information about plants. Southern Maryland Audubon is on Facebook. We're partners with Wild Minds. We love the native
Yes.
plant people of Southern Maryland also. And these are really good ways to find out where plant sales are going on and where you can get natives, and also information. Also, any of your master gardener websites are fantastic for natives and other planting information, because it's all information that's been vetted through trained gardeners through the University of Maryland and the University of Maryland Extension. In fact, one of the things that we like to say when you're looking for information on native plants, always go to a .edu or a .org because you will get the best information there as opposed to a .com commercial site that might just be trying to send you to their particular plants or not give you the best researched or scientific information.
Yeah, and actually one more resource for you. I hate to pile on to the fire hose, but um the Maryland Native Plant Society is another really good resource, and they actually have a pretty updated list of nurseries and sales in the area, and I think they might extend into Northern Virginia. And Northern Virginia has some really active native plant groups going. The Master Gardeners in Northern Virginia have they have a lot of videos online, and the Wild Ones group in Northern Virginia, I forget what their chapter name is, has a lot of planting plans. So
And
definitely
yeah. And
go
Northern
ahead.
Virginia is in the same agricultural zone as us, and many of the natives are we are native to both the region, especially the northern Virginia area that's close to us. So the information you would be getting, that's absolutely right. The information you would be getting from them would be very useful for here in Southern Maryland as well.
Can you just briefly talk about the difference between coastal plain and the zone that we're in, the agricultural growing zone?
So so the agricultural zone growing zone is set by the USDA. And it's just been in the last 2 to 3 years, they've changed the zones because of climate change. And most of us in Maryland are in 7B or 7A. And this is tells you when you go to a package of plants, for instance, a seed packet, they'll usually come with a map that tells you, what time of year you plant them in what zones. And even though it's an agricultural zone, it's also, good for other plants. For natives that grow in the area, since most natives can, survive our winter and they're perennials or biennials, you don't really need to worry that much about the time of year that you're planting them, other than for the survival of the plant. Fall is the best time to plant because unlike with the exception of this year, usually we have rain and then the plants just kind of hunker down for the winter and are working on their roots and then ready to sprout out in the spring. Spring is the traditional time that people think of for planting, and natives, if you plant them in early spring, that's great. The problem is the later it gets in the year, the more you're going to have to water them in the summer. And I know I mentioned that they take less water than other plants, but when they're that first year and those first 2 months after you've planted them, you do need to water them to give them a good start on life. Once they're established, they'll need much less. But if you're planting in the spring, you'll really have to pay attention to them in the summer, especially with how hot our summers have been, to keep them from drying out. And so then the other issue is the section of Maryland you're in. And the coastal plain are plants that live kind of in the area where we are in Southern Maryland and all along the coast, which you get many more of your water loving plants and marshy kind of grasses. The Piedmont area is a little bit drier than we are. It's sort of the central Maryland area. And some of our coastal plants won't do quite as well there. Usually most of the things that grow in the Piedmont will grow pretty well here. But the other sort of different region is the western region, where you're in the mountainous region. So they will have some plants that would not be happy at all here in the coastal plain. And that's one of the great things about the Alliance for the Bay site. It will tell you which ones are strictly really only happy in the coastal plain. But you'll see when you go to the site and you plugging in the information, a huge majority of them will grow in all of our areas in Maryland.
Molly, thank you so much. This session was so informational, so wonderful. Thank you for taking us on a journey of native plants. I have added my email to the chat. Molly's website is also right here. So if you have questions afterwards, please connect either with myself or with Molly's website here, and we'll help get your questions answered. Molly, do you have anything else you want to add before we go for the evening?
I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It's so exciting to see so many people interested in native plants. It's really the way that we're going to help. That it's something you can do in your own yard. When you hear all these things about the problems of climate change and the environment, and you kind of throw up your hands and say, "What can I possibly do?" You'll be amazed at how much more wildlife you'll attract to your yard just by planting a few clumps of natives in your yard. So thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you again, Molly. This was wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I look forward to seeing you every month through March for our future presentations that are included in the virtual winter seminar series. Everyone, have a wonderful evening, and thank you again.